You say you want to be happy. Of course you do. Who doesn't? You work hard, read the books, follow the advice, repeat the mantras, and sometimes it even works for a moment. You catch a glimpse of contentment like sunlight through a crack in the wall, but then you ruin it. Not loudly, not deliberately, just subtly enough to feel like coincidence. You pick a fight, you procrastinate, you numb, you chase something that isn't yours or walk away from something that is. You do that thing, you know, the one that always somehow pulls the rug out from under your own joy, and you tell yourself it's bad luck or just how life is. But deep down, a quieter voice asks, why do I keep doing this? The strange fear of joy. No one teaches you how to be happy, not really. We're taught how to chase it, talk about it, perform it, sure. But to actually feel it, to hold it without flinching, that's a different story. Because if you're honest, joy doesn't always feel safe. There's something unnerving about happiness. It's vulnerable, exposed. It asks you to soften, to breathe, to stop bracing for impact. And for people who've spent their lives preparing for disappointment, happiness can feel less like peace and more like a trap. You know that feeling. When things are going well, suspiciously well. You're in a good place, and instead of enjoying it, you start scanning for what could go wrong. You get anxious, restless, you overthink, you sabotage, not because you want to ruin it, but because something inside you never learned how to relax into joy. Carl Jung wrote that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. And maybe your sabotage is a kind of substitute too, a way to return to a kind of pain that feels familiar, known, yours. Maybe it wasn't a single moment, but a pattern. Maybe you were taught implicitly that happiness is earned, that you have to be good enough, successful enough, healed enough to deserve peace. So even when you find it, you can't keep it, because some part of you still feels unworthy. Or maybe joy was always followed by punishment. You laughed too loudly and someone told you to be quiet. You felt safe, and then someone left. You felt proud, and someone made you feel small. So your body began to associate joy with danger, with exposure, with a fall just waiting to happen. And now, even as an adult, you flinch at joy. You tense up when life gets too good. You resist intimacy. You fear success. You mute your hope just in case it's taken from you. Because if you don't get your hopes up, they can't be crushed, right? But in protecting yourself from disappointment, you also protect yourself from joy. You can't selectively numb. You can't block out only the bad and still expect to feel the good. Numbness is a blunt tool. When you suppress your vulnerability, you suppress your aliveness too. And eventually, you're left wondering why nothing moves you anymore. Why happiness feels distant. Why everything is muted, even when life looks fine from the outside. So you chase happiness in ways that don't require intimacy. You stay busy. You perform success. You gather external markers that say, look, I'm doing okay. But underneath, there's still that quiet fear. What if I lose it all? What if this is just temporary? What if I don't know how to hold joy because no one ever taught me how? And this is where the sabotage becomes seductive, because at least pain is familiar. At least you know how to survive disappointment. You've done it before. There's a strange comfort in the known, in patterns that hurt but don't surprise you, because surprise, that's what happiness threatens you with. The unknown, the uncontrolled, the risk that comes with being open. So you close, just a little and then a little more, until the joy fades and you tell yourself, see, it never lasts anyway. But maybe the problem isn't that joy disappears. Maybe the problem is that you keep running from it before it has a chance to stay. And maybe, just maybe, you don't need to chase happiness or earn it or figure it out. Maybe you just need to stop treating it like a threat. How familiar pain feels safer than the unknown. You'd think we'd all run from pain, that the whole point of being alive is to feel good, to seek pleasure, to avoid suffering. But strangely, we don't, at least not consistently. Some of us cling to our suffering like a blanket. We wrap ourselves in it, even as it suffocates us. And when something good comes along, something bright, something warm, we flinch. We look for the nearest exit, not because we enjoy pain, but because we understand it, because it's predictable, because it's home. People talk a lot about comfort zones as if they're soft and safe. But for many of us, the comfort zone is built from the wreckage of old wounds. It's not comforting because it feels good. It's comforting because it's familiar. There's a certain logic to it. The pain I know is easier to bear than the happiness I don't. So we stay in cycles, the same patterns, the same relationships, the same self-sabotage loops that always bring us back to the place we claim to hate. And yet, we return. We return to the partner who doesn't see us, to the job that drains us, to the coping mechanisms that numb more than they heal. We return because they're known. And the known feels safer than the unknown, even when it hurts. Nietzsche once said, "Man is more afraid of the truth than of death." Maybe happiness is a kind of truth, a clarity that forces you to feel again, to risk again, to be fully alive in a world that doesn't guarantee anything. And that's terrifying. Because to accept happiness is to admit that life might actually hold beauty for you. And to admit that means acknowledging how long you've lived without it. How long you've been surviving instead of living. How much of your life has been shaped by avoidance. Familiar pain doesn't ask you to change. It doesn't ask you to believe in yourself. It doesn't ask you to expand, to trust, to step into a version of you that might outgrow your surroundings. It just keeps you contained, small, predictable. But happiness? That's risky. It's expansive. It threatens to shake the foundations of who you've been. And if your whole identity is built around struggle, then happiness isn't just unfamiliar, it's disorienting. Who are you when you're not hurting? What do you talk about when you're not complaining? Who do you connect with when you stop bonding over wounds? What happens to your story if the suffering ends? These aren't small questions. They live at the core of self-sabotage. Because part of you wants to feel good, but another part is terrified of what that means. You don't sabotage happiness because you're weak. You sabotage it because it challenges the internal map you've used to navigate the world. If you've grown up believing that love has to be earned, then unconditional affection will confuse you. If you've been taught that success must come from sacrifice, then ease will feel suspicious. If your early experiences taught you that joy is fragile, then you'll instinctively resist it. Not because you hate it, but because it doesn't fit the model of reality you were taught to trust. And so, you seek out what matches your internal world. Not what's best, but what's familiar. Psychologists call this repetition compulsion. The unconscious drive to repeat old emotional experiences, hoping this time you'll rewrite the story. But most of us don't rewrite it. We just relive it, over and over until it becomes so familiar we stop even questioning it. You date the same person with a different face. You recreate the same arguments. You make the same excuses for why you're not ready, why you can't start yet, why this isn't the right time. You call it fate or bad luck, but it's not. It's just your nervous system pulling you toward what feels safe, even if it hurts. Because healing, as strange as it sounds, can feel threatening. Not to your soul, but to the version of you that's still holding on to the idea that you're only lovable when you're suffering. That safety must be paid for in exhaustion. That peace must be preceded by a breakdown. So when joy enters the room, you tense. You sabotage. You pull away, not because you don't want it, but because you don't recognize yourself without the pain. But here's the quiet truth. Just because something is familiar doesn't mean it's your fate. Just because pain feels like home doesn't mean you have to keep living there. Carl Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Maybe your self-sabotage isn't a curse, but a signal. A flare from the hidden parts of you that are still trying to protect a version of yourself that no longer exists. And maybe it's time to thank those parts for keeping you alive, and then gently show them the door. Because the truth is, you don't have to earn happiness by first surviving misery. You don't have to bleed for joy. You don't need to prove your worth through suffering. You just need to stop mistaking the familiar for the true. The myth of "I'll be happy when." We're all familiar with the story. It starts with a promise, maybe not said out loud but deeply believed. I'll be happy when, fill in the blank. When I lose the weight, when I get the job, when I find the relationship, when I heal, when I'm finally enough. It's subtle. It doesn't announce itself as a trap. It feels like motivation, like ambition, like a responsible grown-up way to live. Delay gratification, sacrifice now, thrive later. And in theory that's fine, but in practice, later keeps moving. You never quite get there. Or when you do, it doesn't feel like you thought it would. Because happiness isn't a finish line. And no matter how well you build your life around it, you can't cheat your way into peace by stacking accomplishments like bricks. But we try, over and over. We learn early that our value is in what we do, not who we are. So we become achievers, strivers, planners, fixers. And underneath all that effort is the same quiet longing to finally feel okay. Not better than anyone else, just okay, just safe, just at home in your own life. And when we don't get there, we blame ourselves. We work harder. We get more degrees, more things, more validation, trying to outrun the gnawing sense that happiness is always just out of reach. But maybe that feeling doesn't mean you've failed. Maybe it means the premise was flawed to begin with. Because here's the cruel irony. The more you believe in, "I'll be happy when," the more you postpone your right to joy. You build a life around waiting, around conditions, around versions of yourself that don't even exist yet. And when you don't measure up to those imaginary futures, you turn on yourself. You sabotage. Not because you hate happiness, but because you've trained yourself to believe you don't deserve it until you're perfect. Carl Jung spoke about the shadow, the unconscious part of ourselves we reject, deny, disown. And often, the part we bury the deepest isn't our rage or fear, it's our joy. The part of us that wants to dance before the work is done, that wants to rest before the goal is met, that wants to be loved even when we're messy and halfway and still becoming. But that part gets silenced. It doesn't fit into the productivity gospel. It doesn't make sense to a mind trained to quantify worth. So we call it lazy, or naive, or irresponsible, and we postpone our own aliveness in the name of discipline. We live in a culture obsessed with the grind, where doing more is a moral badge, where exhaustion is a status symbol, and happiness, true, uncomplicated, present moment joy, is treated like a dessert you can only have if you've earned it. But you can't earn something that's already yours. You don't need a promotion to deserve peace. You don't need a soulmate to feel whole. You don't need to fix every flaw in your psyche before you're allowed to be content. But try telling that to the voice inside you that keeps moving the goalpost, the one that whispers, "You're not there yet. Don't celebrate. Don't get too comfortable." So you keep going, and you wonder why you keep sabotaging every glimpse of joy that comes too early. Because early in your mind means undeserved, and undeserved means dangerous. So you pull back, you distance, you ruin what was working, not because it was bad, but because it felt too good, too soon. But the truth is, there is no when, there is only now. And that's the part no one teaches us. That happiness isn't something you arrive at, it's something you practice, something you allow, something you stop resisting long enough to experience in real time. But real time is messy. It doesn't always look like what you planned. Sometimes happiness shows up in a moment you didn't schedule, in a body you haven't learned to love yet, in a home that's still unfinished, in a version of you that's still healing. And if you've built your whole identity around striving, then resting in happiness, even for a moment, can feel like betrayal, like giving up, like settling. But what if it's not? What if allowing yourself to feel good now is the very thing that softens the grip of sabotage? What if joy isn't the reward, but the medicine? Because the real myth isn't just that happiness comes later. It's that you're not worthy of it now. And maybe, just maybe, the first step toward healing isn't to try harder. It's to stop waiting. When self-improvement becomes self-rejection. Self-improvement sounds noble, doesn't it? Who wouldn't want to be better, smarter, calmer, more successful, more fulfilled? It's the modern religion, an endless pursuit of the upgraded self. Your feeds are filled with it. The books, the podcasts, the habits of high performers, the routines of people who apparently wake up at 4 a.m., meditate, journal, work out, eat kale, and love every second of it. And maybe you've tried, maybe you've followed the routines, bought the planners, downloaded the apps, promised yourself this time would be different. This time you'd finally become the person who deserves to be happy. And there it is, the hidden clause. The belief you don't even realize you're carrying, that happiness must be earned through transformation, that who you are now is not quite enough, that until you fix this part of you, heal that trauma, change this pattern, you are disqualified from peace. So you keep working. You call it growth, but sometimes it's just rejection in disguise. a polished, productive way to keep saying, "I'm not lovable like this." Carl Jung once said that we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And maybe the darkness isn't just our pain, it's our refusal to accept joy in our unfinished state. It's the belief that love and peace and happiness must be delayed until we're less flawed. And it sounds harmless at first, healthy even. But slowly the self-improvement project turns on itself. What started as curiosity becomes control. You don't meditate to connect, you meditate to correct. You don't rest because you trust yourself, you rest because your productivity system told you to. You start treating healing like a to-do list. And the more boxes you check, the more frustrated you become when you still don't feel better. Because the finish line keeps moving. And no matter how much work you do, there's always more to fix. You feel like a problem that won't resolve. And that feeling, that chronic not enoughness, feeds the sabotage. Because how can you embrace happiness if your entire identity is built around the belief that you need to be better? So you stay in limbo, you fear stagnation, so you keep growing. But the growth isn't joyful, it's anxious, it's pressured, it's tight. It's rooted in fear that if you stop, even for a second, you'll sink back into the version of you you've spent years trying to outrun. But what if that version of you never needed to be outrun? What if they just needed to be seen, held, accepted? Because here's the thing most self-improvement rhetoric doesn't say. You can't hate yourself into healing. You can't guilt yourself into wholeness. You can't shame yourself into becoming someone worthy of love. And yet, that's how many of us live. We wake up and scan ourselves for flaws. We treat every emotion like a symptom to be managed. Every setback is proof that we haven't grown enough. Every joy is premature, as if we're not allowed to feel it yet. So when something good happens, part of you resists, not because it's wrong, but because you've built your life around earning it, and now it's here before you're ready. That's when the sabotage creeps in. Not dramatically, just enough to put you back in the familiar space of not yet. Just enough to confirm the story. See, I still have work to do. But what if you stop measuring your worth by your progress? What if growth didn't mean becoming someone else, but becoming more fully yourself? What if you could be in process and still feel joy? This doesn't mean abandoning your healing, it doesn't mean giving up. It just means noticing when the work is no longer serving your soul but feeding your fear. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do for your healing is to pause, to stop fixing, stop analyzing, stop rewriting yourself, and just live. Messy, flawed, fully human. Not because you've finished the work, but because you've realized that happiness isn't something you graduate into. It's something you allow. Even in the middle of the storm, even in the middle of becoming, you'll never be done. And that's not a flaw in the system, that is the system. So if you're tired of chasing happiness, of accidentally pushing it away the moment it arrives, maybe it's not because you're not healed enough. Maybe it's because you've mistaken growth for worth and peace for a prize at the end. But peace isn't a trophy, it's a practice. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to stop improving and start remembering that you were never meant to be perfect, just present. Why you keep sabotaging your own happiness. Maybe the hardest part isn't chasing happiness, it's letting it in. Not the dramatic kind, not the fireworks or the life-altering moments, just the quiet kind. The cup of coffee that tastes just right, the text from someone who thought of you, the laugh that slips out unexpectedly, the moment of silence when nothing hurts. That kind of joy. The small, quiet joys we usually miss because we're too busy looking for the big ones. But letting joy in isn't easy. It takes a strange kind of courage. Not the loud, heroic kind, the subtle kind. The kind that stays when it would be easier to run. The kind that says, I will not sabotage this. I will not talk myself out of what I've been given. Because when you've spent years preparing for disappointment, joy feels like a lie, like borrowed time. You think, this can't last, so you cut it short. You leave before it leaves you. You become the ghost in your own life, haunting the spaces where you were once fully present. All because it felt too good to trust. But maybe that's the work now. Not to chase joy, but to stop running from it. To sit with it, awkwardly, imperfectly, while every cell in your body wants to find the nearest exit. To breathe into it. To not ruin it just because you don't yet know how to hold it. And no, it won't always stay. Joy doesn't make guarantees, it visits, and it leaves. And sometimes it stays longer than you expect. But the point isn't to capture it. The point is to stop pushing it away. You'll be tempted to wait for permission, for the moment when you've finally earned it. When the world says, okay, now you're allowed. But that moment doesn't come. Not in the way you think. Life doesn't hand out gold stars for healing. It doesn't reward you for being good. Sometimes it offers you joy in the middle of chaos, and you either receive it or you don't. And maybe that's all this is, learning how to receive. How to say yes to peace even when you're still learning to trust yourself. How to say yes to love even when you're afraid it might leave. How to say yes to happiness even when some part of you still believes you don't deserve it, because you do. Not someday. Now, even in your unfinished state, even with all the work left to do. You don't need to be flawless to feel joy. You just need to stop fighting it every time it tries to come close. Maybe the sabotage isn't proof that something's wrong with you. Maybe it's just proof that something new is trying to begin, and you haven't quite let yourself believe it yet. So the next time something good happens, don't rush past it. Don't shrug it off. Don't whisper, "This won't last." Instead, try this. Pause. Notice it. Let it fill your lungs, even if only for a moment. Let yourself be the kind of person who notices joy, who lets it stay, who doesn't need a reason to feel okay. Not because everything's perfect, but because for once you didn't run. Maybe this is what healing really looks like. Not a clean, linear path upward, but a quiet shift in how you respond to the moment. Not some triumphant arrival at eternal peace, but a gentle softening into now. Not punishing yourself when the joy fades, not sabotaging it the second it arrives, just noticing, just being there, without flinching. Because the truth is, there's nothing wrong with you. There never was. You were just born into a world that taught you to mistrust your own happiness, that trained you to seek it like a reward instead of a birthright, that told you had to be more, do more, fix more before you could feel okay. But what if the world was wrong? What if you didn't need to be more? What if you could stop right now and say, this version of me deserves peace too? Not someday. Not when you're healed. Now. In the mess, in the doubt, in the awkward, half-awake confusion of being a human being trying to do their best. You don't need to feel happy all the time, but you do need to stop treating your joy like an intruder. You need to stop opening the door, then slamming it shut because it showed up without warning. Happiness won't force itself in. It'll knock. And if you're too busy trying to become someone else, you'll miss it. So sit still, just for a second, listen. That quiet feeling, that's joy. You don't need to fix it. Or earn it. You just need to stop walking away from it.